Alrighty, we're moving into module 2, which is the paradigm shift in neurofeedback. So what is neurofeedback? Let's start by talking about what a feedback system is. A feedback system is any monitoring of the body and giving information back to that person about what your body is doing. So we have what we call biofeedback, and biofeedback is measuring the amount of how you breathe and whether you're breathing a very shallow breath or whether you're breathing a nice long breath. It also would have how cold your hands are. And the idea is that if you can learn to divert the blood down to your extremities, meaning your fingers or your toes, then you will have a better control over how your body temperature is. It may be that it is the warmth of your hands, being able to change your blood pressure and monitoring it at the same time that you're doing breathing exercises or something like that. So
your respiration rate, your galvanic skin response.
So those are all biofeedback. When it is attached to the head, it becomes neurofeedback. So it's still a feedback system. Your body's still getting information about what it's doing, and then the central nervous system can decide how it wants to respond to that information. So when we talk about neurofeedback, things that are important to understand is that an EEG is considered an electroencephalogram. Now, it is also, well, let me say, an electroencephalogram is typically a diagnostic tool for monitoring seizure activity or to determine, diagnose seizure activity. Now, an EEG is also being used in neurofeedback terms as the electrical information that we are monitoring. So we're monitoring the EEG, but we're not really monitoring it with an EEG per se, because that would be more of a diagnostic thing. What we call our neurofeedback system is NeurOptimal, and we abbreviate it with a capital N and a capital O. This is really important because occasionally you'll see people abbreviate it with a capital N and a little o, which is not NeurOptimal. That's just the word no. So to not be confusing, always, if you're going to use it as an abbreviation, always do capital N, capital O. If you're going to abbreviate neurofeedback, it's usually a capital N and a capital F for neurofeedback. Neurofeedback was not, and is not meant to be a diagnostic tool. Although linear neurofeedback has tried to capture that diagnosis. They have tried to say they can look at the cortical activity or the EEG and immediately change that into you've got this issue or this problem. Now, without going into a lot of detail right now, I'm going to say NeurOptimal does not believe that. NeurOptimal knows and understands that all activity in the brain is chaotic and transient. It's always in movement. It's dynamical. It is never in one state or one place. So there is not a state of relaxation. There is not a state of focus, because that means that once you got to one location, you stopped moving and you stayed there. There is no state. There is general, there's just a generality to the activity, but nothing more than that. So a neurologist would use an EEG for diagnostic purposes, looking for seizure activity, and not really anything more. For us, it is really important to remember that the words we use are very important. So we're going to be constantly looking at our terminology and looking at our language and trying to help you as a trainer understand why it's important. Because I think when we understand why we do something, it's easier to remember, what the purpose is and to use it in that fashion. So both the linear and the dynamical are considered neurofeedback. And neurofeedback is truly considered gentle, painless, and non-invasive. That's about where it changes. We both have certain elements that are the same, but beyond that, they're very, very different. A linear system believes that the brain has a balance and that neurofeedback replenishes a very specific balance. A dynamical system understands that we don't have an internal balance. We are always in movement. And what is important is not an internal balance, but an ability to move in and out at will when needed. If you think about the deer on the side of the road, and you think about the fact that all these cars are going down the road, they're loud, they're honking the horn, but that deer just sits there and eats. The deer knows it doesn't have to worry about all of that noise. It's a natural background for that deer at this point. Now, it doesn't know that the car could hit it, but what it knows is that is natural noise to its environment. When it hears a twig break, it immediately responds by looking around. Is there something I need to be afraid of? As soon as it determines there's nothing to be afraid of, then it goes back and immediately is able to go back to eating. That's flexibility and resilience. That's the ability to always know and understand its environment and yet be able to respond quickly and efficiently. We are not creating balance. We don't know what a balanced place would be because it's always in movement. It's a journey. It's like how do you balance water? It is always moving. So when we talk about the differences between linear and dynamical, almost from the get-go, there is a big difference between the two systems. Those two basic paradigms, and this is the way the question is asked on the quiz. What are the two basic paradigms? Then you are given a multiple choice, linear and dynamical. And then there's another one that's on there that's something totally different, like a feedback loop or something like that. Understand that the two paradigms are linear and dynamical. So when we talk about linear, we are talking about measuring that frequency in two ways, by the frequency itself and by the amplitude. And we talked about the fact that the amplitude is the intensity or the strength of the signal. That's all a linear system measures, is how strong is the frequency. How strong is number one, and what the actual frequency is number two. So it only measures in two ways, period. Whereas the dynamical neurofeedback is going to measure it in four ways. We're looking at that duration, how long that frequency lasts. We're looking at the intensity, how strong is that frequency. we're measuring the frequency itself. Is there like a wobble to that frequency? Is it moving back and forth but somewhat close? Or is it staying right on that frequency itself, the kind of pure tone of the frequency? Or does it have a shift to it? Is it in the process of or already moved from one frequency to another? So we're measuring the differences in the shifts. So we have 4 different ways that we are measuring things. Now, the reason why that's important is there is no way to measure the duration without the duration of a frequency, without being able to measure time. So a dynamical system is able to measure timing, whereas a non-dynamical or a linear system can only measure the strength of a signal, and that's it. So when we look at the 2 different paradigms, obviously more is better in this way. We want to be able to get around that information, that EEG that's coming off of the scalp, and understand as much about it as we possibly can. Now remember, when you think about all the electricity that's going on in the brain, and then you think about all the electricity that's going on outside in our environment, and the only way we're able to measure it is with that tiny little sensor with a little ice cream scoop of paste on it. And that's it. You cannot think that we are able to eliminate all of the extra sound. It's a little bit like trying to listen to Niagara Falls and we only want to measure 1 drop of water. We don't want to hear and measure all that water. So we had to come up with, or Val had to come up with, a way of denoising, getting rid of all of that extra noise in the environment. And Mark's going to really go into detail on this in a little bit, but I will just generally say that remember, the brain is chaotic. If the signal, if the electrical signal is chaotic and not predictable, then within our software program, we measure it. If it is static, if it is at 60 hertz or at 50 hertz if you're in Europe and so forth, but if it stays exactly at the same frequency level and doesn't change, then it's artificial. And it's not important to the NeurOptimal system to measure it. Now, if that's all it had, let's say that you just dangled the sensors out in the real world, then it will measure it because its job is to measure electrical information. But as long as it is on your scalp and not your hair, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but as long as you've got a nice tight connection to your scalp, no matter where it is, even though we'll want to keep it somewhat close, and we'll show you how to do that. But no matter where it is on your head, as long as it's got a good amount of paste and it's got this, it's on the scalp, then all it's going to measure is that chaotic information that's coming off of the scalp. And remember, that in and of itself is just a real challenge, because you not only have your hair on the outside, then you have your scalp, then you have that dura, that membrane, then you have the skull itself, and it has to get that little pulse, that a little electric pulse between all of that. So I mean, it's really a very fascinating process that we're doing with NeurOptimal and or with neurofeedback, in both, in general, in that sense. So both processes, the linear and the dynamical, have a few things in common. One of those is they're both called neurofeedback. One is they both have a software program. Another one is they both use an amplifier to measure that EEG. So meaning that we have what we call our Z amp. That amplifier takes that electrical activity and it makes it louder. More than that, it also changes it from an analog signal into a digital signal so that the computer can read it and understand it. And then both processes have sensors that are pasted on the head. Now, some of the other linear systems might have a headband. Some of them say that they can just get them wet and not use paste at all. But we have done this for enough years to know now, for the very best signal, we want to have that paste on the head. And we've tried lots of different ways and lots of different methods. So if that ever changes, it's because it has been researched to the hilt before we have switched it over. Right now, though, this is the way we do it, is with sensors and paste, and it goes directly to the scalp. So in both systems, the linear and the dynamical, we measure the electrical activity that comes off of the scalp. And this is about where it changes and starts to change pretty dramatically. In a linear process, that means not us, in a linear process, they have a very strong belief system that they are changing and influencing the electrical current that is directly below the sensor. In our science-based process, we understand that that information, that electrical current, is constantly in movement. You saw it. You saw how much information is going on all over the place, starting at the back of the head, going towards the front of the head. I mean, it is in constant movement. And we never know which one is turning on which dendritic connection, which one isn't. So there is no way for us to influence one electrical current. What we are getting is a summation of that electromagnetic information that is occurring in the brain. Now, that is one of the biggest differences, one of the biggest challenges. And when you think about it in this respect, it would be like going to the gym and saying, you know, I have this one little tricep muscle that I can tell is not strong enough. It's only in my right arm, not my left. I can just feel that this one tricep muscle needs to be worked on. And so this would be like a coach going in and trying to only move one and exercise one tricep muscle. You can't do that. Your whole body would move. There is no way that you can affect one muscle in your body without affecting the entire system. And as that one muscle gets stronger, even if you could only isolate the one muscle, it would still affect the whole rest of the system. And in my mind, that's the one thing I loved about NeurOptimal from the get-go, is it was the understanding that we're working with the body, not that we're making decisions based on what we know for somebody else's body. We understand this is a summation of activity, and that whatever changes are being made, it's the client that is making them, because that's the way their body works. And it is the client who makes the decision all the way down the line. It's never us. So in a linear system, they believe they are going to help the person learn to become relaxed and focused, because they believe in states. They believe that, you know, when you fall asleep at night, you're in a relaxed state, and therefore, you know, you are only producing very specific frequencies. Same with focused state. And they also believe they are giving real-time information to how the brain is performing. Now, I have hit those in gold because, as you will notice, our logos are in blue and gold. So I want to go back and look at helps. When with dynamical process, we don't We don't help a person learn to become in a specific state. What we do is we measure that information, and then that person becomes more flexible and resilient. But we're not doing something that would help them produce any one process or not. Real-time information, we monitor this information 256 times per second. That is really, really different from what is happening with everyone else. This information is millisecond by millisecond giving us information as to how that person's brain is performing and telling us through the interruptions in the music what changes, what differences were picked up. Now, we don't know whether it was a difference in terms of duration, intensity, frequency, or shift. We just know that all of those things are being measured. And it's not important for us to know which one of those things are happening. It's important for us to know that when we hear an interruption, or when the brain perceives an interruption that we don't cognitively hear, which is very, very possible, then that information our central nervous system takes as being a change, something different. And it decides whether or not it makes sense to do anything about it. Just like that deer on the side of the road. You know, it heard the twig. Is it important to do anything other than look around and see that I'm safe? And if so, maybe it's time to move from that area and go on to a different area to eat and munch grass. And that's entirely up to our central nervous system at that point. Again, taking it a little closer to home, are we feeling uncomfortable from the position that we're sitting in? I think so. And so I will move to a different position. It's not always good. It's not always bad. It just is information. We are getting information from that electrical signal. Something changed. And then we turn right back around and make a decision based on that. If you guys haven't already recognized, I'm real big about analogies or metaphors, and I think partly because it just helps all of us see a very difficult philosophy in a visual way. So one of the things, excuse me, one of the things I have come up with is this balance beam. When someone walks on a balance beam, if you are thinking of the balance beam as being a linear neurofeedback process, then you would put your feet in front of the balance beam, but you would have bumpers on your shoulders. Those bumpers equate to thresholds in a linear system. So the way linear systems actually work is they created a protocol. In that protocol, they say your 23 to 38 hertz frequencies should not go outside of, and I'm making this up right now, 6 microvolts. So they put thresholds at 6 microvolts. And anytime that frequency goes outside, goes further, it's stronger than that 6 microvolts, then your picture goes off. So what it's doing is forcing your body, your central nervous system, to produce a frequency signal that is at a very specific amplitude that that trainer chose for you. So in this balance beam story, those thresholds or those bumpers are on your shoulders. And every time you lift your left leg to put it in front of your right leg, you tend to lean a little. And that bumper kind of pushes you back onto the middle of the balance beam. And then the same with the opposite leg. And when you lean a little, you get pushed back onto the middle. And it does that over and over and over again, hoping that you'll learn to stay on the balance beam versus pushing you enough that you fall off of the balance beam. With a dynamical approach, it's different. The dynamical approach, because we're not pushing, we're not telling you what to do, all we're doing is showing you what you did, it would be as if this balance beam had mirrors underneath it or on the side of it. And wherever you placed your foot, you immediately saw where you were placing it. And then you made the decision, oops, my foot is partway off of this balance beam. I better readjust and put it all the way on so that I can walk all the way across it. That's the training process. That helps you learn to stay on the beam because you know where you're at. You can feel it, you can see it, you know where you are. And that is exactly what happens with NeurOptimal, is that you learn when you feel good, this is where you are. And when you feel as though you are able to maneuver and be flexible and resilient, this is where you are. So I know I'm spending a lot of time helping you understand the differences between linear and dynamical. And I know some of you may say, you know, if what you're trying to teach me is dynamical, why do you keep giving me all this information about the linear? And I can tell you that the linear has been in existence for a long time. It is in my mind, antiquated, but it's also a historical model. It is what most people know about neurofeedback. So when people come into your office, it's going to be really important that you're able to say, I understand that you used, and you could list many different kinds of linear models, whether it's, you know, brain master or brain state, or, you know, multi-trace or biograph, or there's a lot of different processes out there that are linear models. So it's important that you're able to say, I understand, this is what they do, this is why we're different. Because probably, I would say probably close to half of the people that come into your office have already investigated, they've already learned about neurofeedback. What they don't know is that there's a difference. So you will. So the linear model really has this belief system that the practitioner will affect the strength of that signal. And remember, we called the strength the amplitude. When it wants more or a stronger signal, they are augmenting it. When they want less, they are inhibiting it. Now remember, all they have is the one frequency and the strength of the signal. So the best way for them to augment or inhibit is to put those thresholds up. That center bar has lines that are going out on either side. Those thresholds are literally bars that they put up, that they put as close to that center bar as they feel they need. So if you have an EEG, an electrical current that is flaring, that is really strong and moving a lot, then they'll put a bar up that is like this. Now, at the bottom of the screen is the amplitude, the strength of the signal, with the bar being at 0 and moving outwards. And we'll show you this when we have the matrix mirror up. So they'll put a bar that says 8 microvolts. That's all we want. And so this bar stops that cortical activity from going further. The cortical activity will go further. It's just that the sound is interrupted as soon as it went past it. When they want more, they set those bars out further. So it's almost encouraging the electrical signal to go further before it hits a bar. And that's what's considered augmenting or inhibiting, are these thresholds, these bars. So when I was talking about the balance beam, I'm talking about bars being on your shoulders. So every time you make a step one way or the other and you move a little bit from side to side, it's kind of pushing you back into the middle, which is exactly what's happening here. You have a bar here, it's stopping you, which means that it's what we would call kind of a push-pull signal, a push-pull system. We're telling the brain what it has to do. So the frequency then is this, usually what they do for a linear process is they create a Q EEG. Sometimes it's just called a Q, or a QEEG. It stands for quantitative electroencephalogram. And what that means is that they're looking at all of the, what we call a full cap. And these are all divided into what we call a 10-20 system. And that 10-20 system I'm going to show you in just a few minutes when we talk about putting the sensors on your head. You'll see exactly what it is. And so they have a full cap QEEG with sensors all over your head. And they're going to do usually about 20 to 30 minutes worth of recording. They're going to record this information from your scalp, and they're going to do it under task, meaning that they're going to look at you with eyes open, which is what they consider a task, eyes closed, sitting there reading, or maybe counting backwards by sevens, starting at some obscure number like 783. So that gets a little bit anxiety provoking. And so they want to see what would happen if you were told that you had to do that. They record all of that, and then they give each amplitude a color. So if you are in this specific frequency level and you have this specific amplitude, then you get red. If you are in this frequency level and you get this amplitude, you get blue. And they do that through the entire frequency that they are monitoring. Then what is able to happen in these computers, and personally I love them, I think they're really attractive, is you get this multicolored picture of what happened in your brain in that 20 to 30 minutes. And then they use that picture of what happened in that moment to create a diagnosis and to create a protocol for you. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when they do that, you're then following that protocol for anywhere from 20 to 30 sessions, because they believe that is what your brain needs to be balanced. And that's what they're working towards, is a balanced brain. So when we talk about the differences between dynamical and linear, this is what we kind of came up with to help with that. Now, this is in your packet of information. It's a PDF, and it is all three of the next slides are together in one format for you. Now, what Mark and I used to do in our offices is we would actually go to one of the print stores and we would enlarge it, and then we would laminate it and we would hang it in our office, and normally in our waiting room, so people can just continually look at it and understand, hopefully, the differences between them. Now, we also, and we'll get into this a lot more when we start talking about business models and so forth, but we also would sit down with them and have a new client consultation. And during that time, we would go over this with them. And then we would have another one hanging up in that office so that they're constantly reminded of it. So again, real quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this part because we've already kind of talked about it, is we measure duration, intensity, frequency, and shift as four-dimensional process, which means that we get to measure time. All right, and Mark's going to get into a lot of that. And when we do this, This is what is able to help the individual get back to a time, hopefully, that their central nervous system was able to communicate with itself, which can be called personal transformation. A linear system, on the other hand, is able to make graphs. They're able to talk about the amplitude of a frequency. They've only got 2 ways to measure, and those 2 ways to measure makes it very easy to put it into a graph format. Our 4 ways of measuring, and especially with time, eliminates any and all graphs. What we look at is a waveform, and that waveform looks more like this because we're measuring all the frequencies at all times. And because of that, we're able to get out of it the timing element. We're able to look at what is happening in every single frequency in terms of duration, intensity, frequency, and shift at the same time.
That diagram is a multivariant phasor. Okay, it has in it the entire spectrum of the cortical activity. Now this initial one, that left-hand side is so stable that our cortical activity is never there, but it's always striving for that level. But there's always interruptions. There's always responses going on that is causing that activity to be chaotic, like it is on the right hand 80% of that graph. It's always looking for that comfort level, but it's never going to be there.
Would you like to repeat what you called this? A multivariant?
Multivariant phasor. PHASOR, phasor.
Now, because a linear system is only picking very specific frequency levels and looking only at amplitudes of it, this is the kind of graph it would have. And these are static thresholds. They are always protocol driven, and a diagnosis has got to be necessary for them to know what they want to do with you. And the hard part is this will always produce some element of side effects. Whereas, because it's pushing you into a place that may or may not be comfortable. Whereas with a dynamical system, that is not the case. It is constantly measuring everything, but not pushing you or telling you what to do in any way. It is just information that your central nervous system uses as communication. So now this one's going to be probably a little difficult to hear, hopefully not to understand, but because we're not putting anything in or we're not taking anything out, if someone reacts or responds in a specific way, it's because of the way their body is responding to this information. So if somebody gets anxious, it may be because that particular person responds to change or responds to shifts in that way. Because we can have hundreds of people doing this and they'd never react or respond in the same way, ever. So everyone, it's a little bit like, for those of you that live elsewhere, you may not know of Cracker Jacks. But in the US, we used to have at least, something called Cracker Jacks. And it was a box that was caramel popcorn with peanuts in it. But always at the bottom of the caramel popcorn was a little prize of some sort. It might have been a little, pretend tattoo. It might have been a little model or a puzzle or something that you could put together, but it was always a prize. We never knew what it was going to be, but it was always there. That is kind of the way I describe NeurOptimal. You may go into it thinking, oh, I get these migraine headaches, something fierce, You may think you have a particular problem you want to work on. I can't sleep real well or whatever. This is always giving you the possibility of learning from that information in a different way. So your sleep, I mean, what you are going to get as a subtle change may be something totally different than what you think you are going in for. Like you might, your word finding abilities may be better than what it would be typically, and yet you went in because you were having migraine headaches. So things change that really may or may not have been what you went in for. JTFA stands for Joint Time Frequency Analysis. Please understand that when we measure time, the only way NeurOptimal works is a mathematical process. It doesn't know why you came in and sit down. It doesn't know that you're wearing a blue shirt. It doesn't know that you're a male or a female. It doesn't know anything about you, and it doesn't need to, because it's doing a mathematical process, period. It is measuring the changes in your electrical information. That's all it ever does. So this joint time frequency analysis is the mathematical process that it's using to detect those changes. Now, there is a little bit more than that, and we'll get into that. Really, we get into it a lot in the advanced course, but we'll get into it a little bit more here in just a little bit when Mark starts going through what is driving the mathematics, and he'll just kind of highlight that here in just a little bit. All right, so non-linear dynamical feedback systems, and this is still on that same PDF that we were looking at before, is focusing on resilience and flexibility. We are not focusing on any diagnosis. The neat part about this program is all the expertise is built into the system. So as a trainer, you don't have to know anything at all about what you're doing other than how to put the sensors on and how to make it go. That's it. You don't even have to change people's names if you don't want to. You can use the same name and just keep doing the same thing. You don't have to record it. You can just, I mean, you don't have to save any of the recordings. You can just go through and do a session, and that is all there is to it. We're not going to go back and tell people how they did, because it's a journey. It's just a journey. It's what you're doing. It's the training process. You know, you don't, when you go into the gym and you're doing the treadmill, someone doesn't come up to you and say, okay, today you did this. Tomorrow, and that means that next time this is how you're going to feel. And that's what you got to remember about this program, is it is 100% a training program. Yes, people feel different after they do it, but they are making those changes within their own head. That is not the system making the changes for them. And you know, of all the things that you get from this course, I hope that that one is the one that you remember the most, is that our clients are taking care of themselves. When they use this system, they are taking care of themselves. It's why we can rent the systems out to people. It's why we can sell the systems so they can have them in home. Everything, it is a highly, highly, highly sensitive and complicated program that is 100% foolproof. I mean, you just hook up and you push the button. It's a little bit like a car in that way. You know, you can get a Ferrari. I don't have to know how a Ferrari works. I don't need to know anything other than the fact that I feel really good driving down the road in it, and all I have to do is turn the car key. You know, now personally, I've never ridden in one, so I really don't know. I feel good, but In other words, you don't have to think about anything other than just getting in the car and driving it. And that's exactly what is happening here. I don't need to learn how to change a spark plug and do all of the other things to any of my car. I can just drive it. And the NeurOptimal process is that same way. Now, when we talked about QEEGs, this is the map that they make. So the scale is, this is 0 hertz, 1 hertz, 2 hertz, and it goes through this whole, well, I guess it starts with 1 hertz, and it goes through this whole process of each frequency level, which is a hertz. And then it goes through the amplitude. So at 1 hertz, if your amplitude is this, it's going to be dark blue, it's be light blue, it'll be, a turquoise, it'll be green, it'll be yellow, and it'll be red. And it just goes through each one of them, and then it records what that is, and it comes out with these pretty little pictures. Now, the problem is that doesn't tell us anything, because we know that we're not affecting a specific frequency level. I mean, it's fun to see them, but it would not help us in any way if we were using the NeurOptimal system at all, other than to say, wow, did you really spend that much money on those pictures? Because they're very expensive and totally unnecessary, especially for this system. So, neurofeedback. They both have a feedback loop, whether you are doing linear or dynamical. They both have a feedback loop. The person is sitting here in a comfortable seat. They both have an amplifier. It has to go through a software program. And for a linear, they have to have a trainer here. For NeurOptimal, we don't even have to have a trainer there. Again, we just push the start button and it goes. So let's talk about this for a moment. The sensors are on the head. You have to be able to hear the music because the music has the interruptions. The interruptions are indicative of the change, a change in terms of, for us, duration, intensity, frequency, and shift. So the electrical change is being given to us through the interruptions in the music or the interruptions in the visual. Now, many of you may not know that the visual does interrupt, and that's partly because it's always in movement, but it'll have a little bit of a stop for just a tiny millisecond if you're able to catch it. Now, if you have a lot of interruptions at the same time, then you'll see a bigger skip, or you'll hear a larger interruption. So you have these sensors on your head. They go through and into the amplifier, which of course we call our Z amp. The Z amp is labeled. It tells you the right side and the left side. We have 3 sensors on the right side and 2 sensors on the left side. And it has what we call a ground that goes on the lower earlobe. And you put your ground where you have no activity. You put the head, which is on both sides, which is your active sensor. It's getting all the information that it can get. And then you have on the right side what we call a ground, an active, a reference lead or a reference sensor. And that reference sensor is going to be in a place that it has a little bit of activity, but again, very little. And so you're measuring the difference between the active and the reference sensor. Now, Mark's going to get into, again, and I keep saying that, we'll get into more, but we're trying to give you just a general background, and then we're going to go more specific as we get to it. And hopefully everybody will be comfortable with that because they will have already heard about it, and now they're just going to clarify that even more as we talk more about it. So here, remember, this is amplifying the signal, but it's also changing it from analog into digital so that the computer software program will read it. then immediately an interruption is given back to the individual. Now you can tell when we say real time, it's got to go through a lot to get to real time, but we're doing it 256 times per second. You guys might want to say that one out loud just so you hear it again. 256 times per second. That's crazy fast. I mean, that is incredible. For a linear system, it has to go to this person standing here, and that person has to make a change based on what they just saw happened in somebody else's head. So by the time this person is actually able to see, oh, wow, they're getting a lot of amplitude in that area, it may be 10 minutes down the road and that activity's already changed again by then. So it delays it considerably when you have to have a person make a judgment based on what they see is going on. All right, Mark, I'm going to ask you to come over and talk about a sine wave and what it actually is and looks like and so forth.
This is what more than likely you think about when you think of cortical activity. We shy away from the term brain wave, especially in class. Okay, that might be a term you need to use when you're relating to your clients, because everyone has that kind of understanding of brain waves. But truly, brains don't wave. Okay, they generate electrical information. They generate what we're monitoring. Okay, and electricity we reflect in a wave form. Okay, so this is just a very simple wave form, and it's what we look at when we drill down to a particular little bit of information. Okay, remember that multivariant phasor that we showed earlier? That's truly the amount of information that's going into the system. It's what we're monitoring. But this is a very, very drilled down waveform of what how we would graph electricity. You know, over time, left to right over time, we've got this wave. And let me just go to the next page now, because this is when we start to look at this electrical activity in terms of what our central nervous system is generating. Here again, on a very, very drilled down level, it looks a little bit more like this. But we need to drill down here so that we can really talk about frequency and amplitude. Okay. Again, we've got time going from left to right. All right. As we progress here, we've got this piece of information that we're plotting out as a waveform. Now, when we talk about frequency, okay, by definition, it's number of waveforms in 1 second. All right. So if we're plotting along here, and of course there's no hash marks here, but if we say from here to here is 1 second. Okay, this is a little bit of 1 hertz activity, 1 complete waveform in 1 second. All right. So we would put that in the very lowest bin on our matrix mirror and call this 1 hertz activity. Now the interesting thing is, let's assume we don't have any hash marks, so we don't know, but let's say from here to here is also 1 second. By glancing at it, that's maybe close. All right, let's assume that it is. We have 1 complete waveform in, again, 1 second of time. So this also is 1 hertz activity. Okay, would fall into the same bin as this 1 hertz activity. All right, but they're different, aren't they? This distance from our center to our peaks is greater. All right, this is what we call the amplitude. It's the energy expended in this 1 Hertz activity. So we would say that this 1 Hertz activity has a higher amplitude than this 1 Hertz activity. Makes sense? There's more there's more energy emitted for this activity than this activity. We measure that in microvolts. Those of you who have the professional system and have the matrix mirror, if we turn this up 90 degrees, this is how what we're graphing as the distance from our center line as those colored bars bounce further and further from the center line. We have more amplitude of that frequency, more energy emitted of that frequency. So hopefully that makes some sense to you of how we're monitoring this electrical information and displaying it, and the difference between frequency and amplitude. Now, let's say this is 1 Hertz activity, but let's say this is 1 second, and we're actually monitoring and displaying now up to 64 Hertz. Okay, 64 Hertz would be 64 complete waveforms in that same second. So you can imagine what this would look like if this were 64 Hertz activity. Bam, 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 you know, it would bounce 64 full waveforms, 64 peaks and 64 valleys in this same amount of time. And so it's got to really be flying to do that, doesn't it? And that's why we call those the higher, faster frequencies, because they are really booking. That is intense activity versus this 1 Hertz. That may come into more focus as we look at the screen itself. You know, Lisa talked about all of the different sensor locations for full EEGs. They really run on what we call the 10-20 system that has divided the scalp, and if you were doing a medical diagnostic EEG, you know, really looking for seizures, you'd be using a tape measure and you'd be doing this exact like this. Odd numbers are always on the left, even numbers are always on the right, and we always use C3 and C4. From the profile view here, here's C3, this one right here, and from the view from above, here's C4. So this would be C3 and C4. Now, Lisa talked earlier about what are we really monitoring there. And it is a summation of all of the cortical activity. Okay? This is real important to understand, because we don't need to move our sensors around to monitor all of our cortical activity. It's electrical. Our brain matter is in effect floating in a conductive gel. Okay, so I liken this to standing at the side of a swimming pool, putting your toe in the water on one end and dropping an electric cord in the other end. You're going to monitor that electrical impulse clear from the other side of the pool. Okay, so the fact that we're only at C3 and C4 doesn't mean we're not collecting and monitoring the occipital lobe, the temporal lobe. We are getting all of it. Okay, and that really is with every spot that you see here. Anywhere on the skull is going to monitor all of the cortical activity. It's just going to change the view a little bit. Okay, so why are we at C3, C4? It's simply that it is the most central location. It's halfway top to bottom. It's halfway front to back. Okay, pretty basic. We're not monitoring just underneath that placement. And to that note, to the sensor designations. You know, it really is just these active leads, the yellow ones that we're placing on C3, C4. We call those the active leads, the active sensors, actually. And the blue clips that are on the ears are called the reference. And there's basically no cortical activity that, of course, makes it out to the top of the ear. It's just there on that cortically dead cartilage out there, right? So one of the first denoising activities that's happening here is in that Z-amp box in our amplifier that is simply looking at the voltage drop between the active and the reference. So the blue isn't there to collect any cortical activity. It's just there to reference the active and give us our first level of denoising. And this is a new term that's now thrown out, denoising. Lisa did talk about how much noise was in our environment now, our electrically dirty environment. You know, we've got these wires that are going through this ether of all of this outside noise. Back when I was in school, we used to, you know, tape wires to our rabbit ears and stretch them across the rooms to pick up this noise for our radios and or TVs at the time. So we know that even though that wire is shielded, it's going to pick up some of this outside noise. So this first step is going to basically eliminate that, because the active lead is going to pick up that same level of noise that the reference lead is going to pick up, and it's going to negate that. Okay? So it starts right from the beginning to try to clean up this as best we can.
Everybody has disorders, and that just means that our brain is not flexibly and resiliently able to process information the way it needs to. So those disorders may be internal and are, you know, genetic. They may be something that we've gained, like trauma along the way. It may be, you know, there's something going on in our world and life that's kind of thrown us off balance. Whether it's depression, anxiety, whatever it is our body's way of coping with what is going on. So it's never bad that our body's trying to deal with things the way the best it can. What we hope will happen with neurofeedback is that we are going to train the brain to respond differently than it is in the moment. So when we talk about a disorder, what is actually happening in the brain is we have a very consistent, persistent electrical pattern that is not changing. It's staying exactly the same, so that it can recreate the anxiety or the depression or the problem, that the symptom that is being produced right now. Because if you stopped producing that consistent, persistent pattern, then you wouldn't be anxious and you wouldn't be depressed. Now, the thing is you don't have control over that. I can't go in and say, okay, I'm going to reduce my 23 hertz activity to 7 hertz so that I don't feel this way anymore. I may consciously understand and know that that's what my brain's doing, but I can't change it by myself. So you can't just talk somebody through it. You can't just say, oh, just stop being anxious. You don't have anything in the world to be anxious over. It won't work, because you've got not only an electrical signal, but that electrical signal is also producing a chemical signal, which is producing that electrical signal to stay that way again and again and again. So what neurofeedback is trying to do is in the middle of you producing this signal is to interrupt it with, in our case, an interruption. It is silence. As short as it is, it's enough to say, hey, 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 so that you stop producing that consistent, persistent pattern. And it's rather, on an unconscious level. It's not on a subconscious. It's not like, well, it's just an unconscious level. You don't recognize that you're doing it, but you're, just as your heart beats and you are, breathing and everything else, your body's going to respond to this interruption in a way that really does break up that consistent, persistent pattern. Now, when we talk about, with NeurOptimal, the idea of renormalizing, what we're saying is going back to a place of flexibility and resilience. So what we're working on is breaking up a consistent, persistent pattern, electrical pattern that's going on in the brain, so that we can, renormalize, so that we can get back to a place of flexibility and resilience. And that, in a nutshell, is exactly why neurofeedback works, is we can get into any kind of a position that can trigger us to recreate that consistent, persistent pattern. But I can tell you it's exhausting. It takes so much energy to reproduce that over and over and over and over again that the person is mentally and physically exhausted and very easily kicked into depression, because how fatalistic does it feel that you can't get out of that loop, that you're stuck in it, that you can't produce what you used to be. And by the way, any kind of a symptom is only upsetting to the person because they know they didn't used to produce it. Otherwise, they'd never know. I look at our daughter, and she was born with this melted brain in certain areas. So she's never been able to do certain things. So there isn't a frustration to her that she can't do it because she never did do it. So she doesn't even know that it's wrong that she can't do it. Now, at the same time, she can also see what other people are doing and want to do that. So she's always still got that goal of learning and doing more. Other people go to college. Why can't she? It is an interesting thing what our brain does, though. It fills in the gaps, and that's exactly what happens if you are born with a problem, a disorder of some sort. You don't recognize symptoms. A symptom will physically manifest anytime you feel as though you are not able to resiliently and flexibly respond to the environment. Then you get some sort of a symptom. And that's exactly what neurofeedback is disrupting. Now, that is why a linear process works 50% of the time, is it's still disrupting that persistent pattern. But because it is pushing you by a disruption, it also produces some sort of side effect about 50% of the time. There was a gentleman that actually was trying to train twice a day, and at some point actually felt worse than better. Now, that can happen for a couple of reasons. One is that it is exhausting. It's like going to the gym and working out, and you do eventually get tired. And this is why we have to really rely on the individual to tell us how they feel, what they want, what they need. Do you need a day off? Do you want to come back? Those are all things that We don't know what's going on in their brain. It's their brain. They have to share that with us. Secondly, for that, we want them to start feeling those subtle little changes so that they know that when they get close to not feeling able and in that renormalization stage, they're able to say, I think I want to do a session. So we want that, we want them to respond to that. But secondly, when someone starts to feel something different than what is comfortable to them, there's a couple of different reasons. One is that the way they particularly are learning this new set of information is outside of the way they have been performing over the last however many years or months or whatever that symptom has been there. And so because they are performing differently, it doesn't feel quite normal. It feels much more abnormal to them. That consistent, persistent pattern has been broken up or is starting to break up, and that change is enough that it's kind of fearful. They don't know what to anticipate. They don't know what to expect. It feels different. You know, if you were to be in a comfortable position and you sat in it long enough that it was now uncomfortable, and I came up and said, why don't you try this position? And I tried to get you into a position that you had never been in, or that you was a little different for you. Sometimes getting into that position is enough that you say, gosh, I don't want to go there. This isn't right. This doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good. And you might get fearful. You might get anxious. You might, you will respond in a different way. This is one of the reasons why Sue Brown will always say, and we always repeat her because I believe wholeheartedly she is 100% accurate, that if anyone feels something that is a little different, a little off, and it's a little uncomfortable, then the very best thing you can do with NeurOptimal is to continue to do it. Continue to do a session, because you cannot stay in that uncomfortable position for any length of time unless you are physically making yourself reproduce that feeling again. You will just eventually move straight through it, and eventually meaning within a session or two. You just move through it because you're dynamic.
Yeah, and the central nervous system is designed to move away from discomfort.
Absolutely, always.
Prime goal,
yes.
Basically.
So not everything out there is neurofeedback. Now, the reason why this is important for you is that you will find a lot of people will say, oh, I use this sleep CD at night so I can sleep better. Or have you ever heard of that vibration mat? It really helps me. I lay on it every day. Can I do that at the same time? Or just all sorts of different things. My child responds better, focuses better if they do binaural beats. The thing is that what we are doing is we are training this person's central nervous system to respond to those interruptions. If you are doing any kind of an entrainment or migration system, and what they mean by that is putting in a dominant frequency, creating a vibration that's loud enough that the body is responding by reproducing that signal in their brain or in their body, then you are forcing it to do something else. So if you have one process that is forcing you to do something, and you are at the same time trying to train somebody to teach them to learn to respond on their own, then they're counteracting each other. And so we do not want both systems going on at the same time. So the Zengar position on that is never do anything else at the same time as you're doing the NeurOptimal process. Now, with that said, I'm going to tell you that as a cognitive rehabilitation therapist in my own offices, many times I'd play games with the kids. And they were games that I knew would just help them, either problem solve or critically think or something like that. It was a learning program. It was not putting anything into their brains. It was not taking anything out of their brains. It was very easy for them to play a game, read, do something on their phone that was either a game or reading or something like that. There's nothing really wrong with that unless the game is agitating or the game produces some sort of a response that is an extreme. Like I think of the shoot 'em up games and blood and gore and all that kind of stuff. You can't do that and giggle. Well, and if you are giggling, I don't know that you're teaching the best thing there. You want to be cognizant about what it is that they're doing. You don't want to watch a movie on a TV with the sound all the way up, because it's going to interrupt with them being able to hear the interruptions in the music of NeurOptimal. So, you can do EMDR, but if you're doing EMDR, then don't use the vibration pads. Don't do anything that forces the body to change or do something. You could very easily still do the tapping on their knees or their thighs if you want, but it's not going to be the same as a vibration mat. Or you can do the EFT, you can do some of the other things that you do as a therapist, but at the same time, know and understand, and Mark's going to get into this just a little bit in basic course, that it is called an extrinsic constraint. So it is truly possibly changing the response to the NeurOptimal process. Your very, very, very best bet when you use NeurOptimal is to do nothing. Don't talk about things that are going to be, like talk therapy and things that could be triggering. Be aware of the fact that they're going through a different type of training program right now. And if you want to do any of the other kinds of talk therapy or psychoanalysis or things like that, you might want to go through, a number of these sessions before they start coming in and challenging their brain with a trigger. So those are all things that we really do get into a lot in the advanced course on. So I highly recommend that if you are a therapist, particularly, you take the advanced course. And I guess that's about all I really need to say on this one. Sound systems are binaural beats, Monroe Institute. There's a lot of different sound programs for auditory processing. All of those push the brain to a special or specific place. They might be very comfortable and people might really enjoy them, but they're not to be used at the same time. And I don't even mean like in the same hour. I just mean in the same months that you are doing the NeurOptimal process. And once you have finished the NeurOptimal process, more than likely, the need for those other things won't be as great. But if they are, then you can always introduce them later. Okay, so that, just very quickly also includes things like LINS, ILS, TLP, Tomatis, Neurotone, all of those other sound systems that are out there.